It's an absolute pleasure to welcome Kunal Sampat to the What's in Your Strategy podcast. Kunal, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Just to let the listeners know, Kunal and I know each other. We've worked together in the past and have stayed connected for several years. And one of the wonderful things that he and I did together, we were in a book club together. And one of the books we read and met about weekly was this book called Simple. I don't know if you can see it or not. Simple.
Yeah, I can see it.
Conquering the complexities, conquering the crisis of complexity. And it was a very fun time to get to know Kunal's views about making complex things simple along the way. And we had a lot of fun doing it over about 4 or 5 weeks, I guess it was. So, yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah. No, it was it was great, David, to be part of the book club. And I love book clubs because it gets you thinking and makes you also understand different perspectives from different people, because you may read a chapter a different way than I would,
right?
And then we get to exchange ideas in the process.
No, that's exactly right, and that was one of the things I did for a couple of people on the team. Was I would read a book and I'd highlight, make notes, give it to them, and they would highlight, and make notes, and kind of circle around, and we'd look at it at the very end. Kind of a leadership type book, I guess that's what it was. But that's one thing that we all noticed was that each of us had specific things that were near and dear to us that we wanted to highlight. Anyway, this is about what's in your strategy, and I want to hear a lot of things about your strategy, Kunal. I admire you so much. But let's start out with a question. What were the challenges you went through, and what did you learn? And I asked that question because I've known you for a long time, and your academic career, your career working in clinical research with clinical research organizations, with manufacturers, consulting, starting a entrepreneurship business, and then starting podcasts, your clinical trials podcast, which is very famous. And with all those things that you have done, what are some of the challenges that you went through for our listeners to learn from, and what did you learn?
Yeah, so I would just say from a challenges perspective, I think one of the firm beliefs I have is we all have different challenges, no matter how rich or famous you are and kind of where you are on your journey, whether you're just starting off or you're like a CEO or a president or a chairman of the board. Yeah. Everybody is going through different challenges. For me specifically, and I think this is a story that I haven't shared a lot, or I haven't shared, I think, online at least, is I when I moved to the US, I was only 17 years old, and I moved by myself. My family was still back home. And I remember like just the whole experience being very difficult, like transitioning to the US as a young kid, and me being homesick. But I don't think it kind of quite ended there. I think it was like I had a great like college life, but then once I started working, I was on a visa, which really a lot of people are in a situation like me where they are like working on a visa. And it can be a little rough, right? Because the future is unknown for you, and you don't know what's going to happen, whether you're going to, get your green card or whatever the case may be that you're trying to get to that next phase of your life. And I remember like several times, like during my career, I had some very difficult conversations and difficult experiences with different managers. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm going to lose my job, and then I'm probably going to be having to go back home, or so on and so forth. And I actually, in hindsight, it wouldn't matter so much. And I think I'd also like talk to myself, like if I had to go back home, it wasn't like a big deal. But I think that fear of unknown and what's going to happen, I just want to kind of highlight, like, I think a lot of people are experiencing that, in general on a day-to-day level. I also had one manager at least tell me like, hey, that we can find a lot of people like you to do this job. You understand that, right? That's what manager told me. And that was like a big realization for me. It's like, okay, this is all about business. And when you work in a company or a corporate sector, you kind of are at the mercy of your employer. And I think that was a big realization for me, in my career.
Mm-hmm. Did you have just a follow-up question? Did you have a job back in India, and you lived outside Mumbai? Is that correct?
I lived in Mumbai. I didn't have a job in India. I mean, I used to work for my uncle
Yeah,
on a part in the
yeah,
summer, but that wasn't like a, that was, just as a
yeah,
cashier.
yeah.
Really, that's all I did for the summers. But I did, I think my first job was in the United States when I moved here. Working in the cafeteria, cleaning dishes.
Yeah,
So that was my first
yeah.
job. So I think the only reason I wanted to bring up my challenge is if you are, even if you're not on a visa or whatever, I think the point being that everybody has different challenges going on in their lives,
Mhm.
and I think we got to respect that and be aware that nobody is kind of challenge free per se.
Yeah, that's true. That's very, very true. Thank you for bringing that point up. I've got a question here about what underrated tool or that you feel like was indispensable for your job, and you've had several types of journeys in the job, and like to get your thoughts about that. About what's the secret tool you think that to not underestimate.
Yeah, I think the number one tool is understanding human psychology. I think as in no matter which sector you work in, or which whether you work for sponsors or clinical trial
Hmm.
sites, or regulatory affairs, you work for the government. I think we're all human beings, and I think being able to work with other human beings is an art and a skill in
Hmm.
itself. And I think I am also on this journey of trying to get better and better with it over time. So it sounds like, in terms of like the tool, I think, there's a specific script that I keep repeating or keep telling myself. It's like everybody's trying to do their very best. And I think when I get frustrated with someone, then I just say, okay, this person is really trying to do their very best. And I think it kind of calms me down, and then allows me to give them the benefit of doubt. Like, yeah, maybe they were having a bad day, or maybe they don't understand this very well. They need some education or some skills in that area. And then it makes me feel like I could help them in their journey.
Yeah.
So that's one. And I think working on any project, I think, I always can think that, how can I include other people
Mhm.
in the decision making process? I think the way decisions are made in today's world, even if you're a president or CEO or VP or director or manager, you're not making decisions by yourself. You need to include your team in the decision making process. And I think that has also been, I think, indispensable. I would say, like a tool in my toolkit. It's like, how can I involve more people in the decision making process? I mean, obviously there are technology tools like you could talk about. Like, one of my favorite tools from a technology perspective is Office Timeline to create project timelines.
Mhm.
You can check it out, officetimeline.com. You can create really beautiful timelines, but that's more on the tactical side as a project manager. But on the day-to-day level, I think just being able to get along with people and working as a team and realizing people are doing their very best, I think that will in itself will serve you very, will serve you really
That
well.
seems like a good way to build that environment, that milieu, to make really people want to do their best. When they feel comfortable
Mhm.
that you believe that in them, and they don't have to worry about that because, in a way, you have their back. This is a follow up to the couple of questions above that I've asked, but this is like, what's in your strategy? I'm interested to hear from you, and I think the listeners would too. Of all the wonderful projects and challenges and tasks that you have been given and that you've succeeded in and succeeded well, um, can you think of a time where you had to think about the strategy that you were going to use to overcome this either challenge um, or
Yeah.
or task or opportunity? I mean, you and I have known each other, and I've got several that when I've watched you and to see just how amazing you were getting to the bottom line and getting to the results. But what pops up to your top of the list when you think about using strategy, strategic thinking in order to accomplish
Mhm.
something?
Yeah, a couple of things. So one might sound very non-traditional, I would say, but I always try to think of ways how I can do things in the opposite way of how somebody
Yeah.
else is doing. So if somebody's taking a certain approach to, and I know it's kind of hard with regulations and so on, like you can't do things in the opposite way, but you can still think creatively within the scope of the regulation. It's like, how can you do things in a non-traditional way? So I've worked on like some pretty interesting projects where we took retrospective clinical trial data and then we submitted to the FDA. We actually got a PMA approved by the FDA using retrospective data. Basically, we skipped the whole time it took to you would have spent to enroll new patients in a trial, and millions of dollars, of course, in the process. So we for about $500,000, we were able to get that includes FDA fees and working with a couple of sites and their registry data, and then using that data to get the product on the market. So again, thinking of ways on how you can think of what would be the opposite of doing a trial. So the opposite is not doing a trial, and how can I not do a trial and get the same results, right? So I think I like to think about it that way. And another tool and it's free for people to use, you can Google search it. It's called a ShipIt Journal, SHIPIT. ShipIt Journal, and the name of the author is Seth Godin, SETHGODIN. He's my favorite author of all times. And Seth has a PDF that you can download from his website, and then there's also an audio component to it that you can also download. And what Seth tells you is that you want to complete those journals for every new project that you take on. So anytime you have a new project, you pull out the journal, you can print it out at home, or you could, get a fancy journal from one of the websites. I think moo.com sells it, MOO.com. They have ShipIt journals that you can buy, and then use the audio, turn on the audio on your computer, and then sit down by yourself or with your team, and then complete the journal. Basically, what the journal really does is it helps you conquer your fears and kind of puts them on paper. So it helps you kind of say, okay, here are the different issues that I can think in my brain can happen with this project. And then it forces you to confront them on paper. So the minute you put it on paper, they kind of disappear. And I know it's kind of crazy how that works, but it does. And I recommend checking out the ShipIt Journal. So that I think those would be my two pieces of advice or suggestions.
Really
for the listeners.
I noticed in you this entrepreneur spirit that you have, and actually, I think you and your wife have a sense of starting businesses and things like that. And one of the things I think could be related to the indispensable tool, underrated tool, is what's your favorite productivity hack for entrepreneurs? And we live here in the Silicon Valley area here in California, and it's one of the hotspots of entrepreneurship, startups, financing, and things. And so I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about your favorite productivity hack for entrepreneurs. Yeah.
I think there's a few, but I think the big one is just getting stuff done, just getting shit done. I think people just sit on it and contemplate forever. And it's not going to be perfect. And I have, there's this concept called the messy middle, where you create something and then you ship it out, and then it's messy, and then you iterate on that on the last version that you had. So that iteration is really critical. And we're just afraid to ship something because we feel like people will not like what we shipped, and we don't realize that, hey, that iteration process is really critical to making things better. So I think that I would suggest that. And then what else? I'm trying to think. What was your question again?
It's about your favorite
productivity hack.
Productivity hack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think waking up early is really key. I think waking up at 5 is awesome. And you basically, the world is sleeping and you can get some really important things done the first 3 hours of the morning. This morning I was up at 5:45 and I got a few things done that I knew were really critical to push me forward through my day. So I think it's kind of hard to, you want to snuggle in your bed and just sleep or whatever, but I think just getting yourself out and about and moving. I think a 20-minute walk has been awesome. Just get out of the house and do a quick 20-minute walk if you don't feel like exercising. Those things, I think taking care of your mind and body are really critical in the process.
Yeah, that's really good. And we've talked about that before in the past about the importance of having that time in the morning. I've seen
That's right.
I've seen the benefits of that myself, and and want to honor and value that perspective and support you in that too, because I too have seen it helped me in my life. So let me go back. Let's take you back to when you were 18 years old, and you know what you know now. But if you could have whispered something in your ear when you were 18, knowing the journey that you've been on, how successful you have been, how much of a leader you've been, how you've mentored people along the way, and help people grow their career. What would be one thing that you would tell yourself as that 18-year-old in Mumbai? I guess growing up.
Well, I was
Oh,
in the
you were
US
in the
by
U.S.
then,
Okay,
but
yeah.
sure, I was, yeah, when I was
Okay,
17. Yeah, I
okay,
moved to the US. Yeah, I think my advice would be really stop blaming other people for all the mess you go through in your life. Or for example, like one of the things I did not really enjoy or wasn't in the habit of was reading books when I was 18. Like, yeah, you're in college and you got to do
yeah,
stuff and learn. But I think, after I graduated, I kept blaming my parents. It's like, hey, you guys never you know, encouraged me to read books, and I think that was really a big mistake on my part to
yeah,
blame my parents for they never stopped
yeah,
me. So I think in 2013 I just made a conscious choice. It's like I'm going to pick up a book and just start reading, and then from there, like I just kept learning and growing. So I think the take ownership of your life, basically, that's probably the thing I would tell
yeah.
myself. It wasn't like I was not responsible. I think I was very
Mhm.
responsible at 18, but I still think there's things that I felt like I could have learned things much faster, from other
Yeah.
people, rather than trying to blame people that, for my
Well,
shortcomings.
what I mean, thinking back on books and things that you've read, and you're always making recommendations about books that you've just recently read. When we've talked in the past and had sort of either non-business meetings or business meetings together since we have gone our different directions, and I've always valued your thoughts about finding these unique authors, to read and things. But could you have one or two books that you could share with our audience about something that you've read that was meaningful to you, or something that you're about ready to read?
Yeah, so there's a couple that I've been listening
Yeah,
to, not
yeah,
reading as such, but I think there's a Jim Rohn book called, I think it's called Jim Rohn, The Complete Library,
yeah,
or
yeah,
something like that. I can look it up. But it's a great book. He's a motivational speaker. He's not alive anymore, but the people like Tony Robbins basically trained under Jim.
yeah.
So that would be a great book. It's called The Ultimate Jim Rohn Library. You can find it on Audible. I think it's been a great book for me. I learned a few things, in the process. So I highly recommend. And then another cool one, and I think this is an area where I'm trying to. I'm also like gravitated. It's just my interest. Like I'm gravitated towards legal concepts a lot. Like I don't know. I like the law, for
Yeah.
some reason. And I read or listened to this book called From the Great Courses. And Great Courses has a lot of different books that you can
Yeah.
check out, and you can learn about different topics very quickly. It's called Law School for Everyone. So that's like another like fun book to explore, because if you live in the US or any Western country, obviously there's laws involved, and I think your ability to understand legal concepts or legal ideas can really help make your life go a little smoother, or much smoother, I would say. So those are two big books. I also tell people, like, America is a country of laws, and if you can really understand how the legal system works, you can actually benefit a lot from it. So that's another reason why I would recommend this book
That's
to
great.
to people.
That's good. And I can validate independently that, because you recently accomplished a huge goal in getting that RAPS designation, which has to do with getting
Mm.
products on the line on the market all over the world. And so there was that was an independent confirmation of that thought of yours to try to understand the laws. In this case, about getting products to the market and things. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I recommend the wraps. The certification is more. I mean, it's more for you. Like, you can learn the
Yeah.
things that you may be uncomfortable with, and then it forces you to
Yeah.
learn. I would say it's not necessary, but it can really be helpful. But yeah, RAPS is a great organization. They have some really good publications that they publish
Yeah.
themselves. So
I got several of them on the back
folks
of my.
can
I got several
check it out.
ebooks and several of the hard copies also on the back of my library too. So that's very very true. So as we get to the close, where can people find you online, and start communicating with you?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think the best way to connect me with is on my podcast. It's called the clinicaltrialpodcast.com. That's my website. So you can check it out. Obviously LinkedIn, I'm just, I think with LinkedIn, just the volume of messages is very high. And I feel like sometimes people are not very, clear on what they need from you or what is the intent of the connection. I'd love to connect with people, but also I think if you need something from me on LinkedIn, probably not ideal. I would recommend you just send me an email at Kunal at Clinical Trial Podcast with your requests and what you need. But LinkedIn is a good place to connect, and my website, like I said. So those would be
That's great. Those are two good places. We
can
can easily get that all to you all over the world. Well, thank you, Kunal, for spending a few moments today. We've learned a lot about your thinking and your maybe the mentorship along the way as people are going to be listening to this podcast. And so thank you for your time today.
David, I'm really excited for you for starting this podcast and considering me as your number one guest. So I'm really excited, and I'm so glad you are.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that was strategic. It was part of my strategy. It should. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay, take care.